Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first video of 2021. I hope you're having a better year than me, although it's not hard, you know. The void is all-consuming, and we live in a society, but more importantly, I hope you notice that from this point on, videos will have a little bit more effort and should be a little bit better because I'm actually using a script for the very first time on this YouTube channel. You know, I've decided that putting even more effort into videos instead of just going off the cuff with the free videos in the past will hopefully take the channel to the next level. For a little example, the previous video took 6+ hours to record the voiceover going off the cuff, using knowledge obviously I already knew about the process of what was happening with Cyberpunk, and then finding examples to back up my point, which I already knew were there. But I was incredibly ill that day and I pushed through because I thought, you know, talking about Cyberpunk would get me quite a few views, so I pushed through. And yeah, it didn't. So, welp, these things happen. It's very difficult to go from having somewhat of a following on YouTube and having a channel that actually had quite a lot of views to deleting it and then rebuilding yourself from the ground up. It does not happen instantly, you know. So yeah, there's that. Hopefully you'll notice. We'll see, won't we? I like making these, and that's the most important thing. Like, I have things to say and points to be made, and I think they're valid and they need to be made, you know. I've also got a list of ideas I can just rattle off for like videos going on. I know what you're thinking. You've looked at the title, you're like, games shouldn't be political, get politics out of my games. Yes, this video is actually addressed to you, effectively, that kind of person, you know. There are two differentiations of the get politics out of games people, and we'll get onto that exact thread very shortly. But this has 3 examples of games that use political themes and politics are in the story of it, and I think most would agree that they're good games, you know. Some of them are some of the most highly rated games of all time, and believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, I really could have made this video like 2 hours long if I went over every game that had political themes. Grand Theft Auto, for example, that has a lot of political themes in there, isn't it? There's a lot of parody about the two-party system in Grand Theft Auto and how they don't actually do anything for the people, you know. After this elongated intro, let's get into the proper video.
Hi, I'm Jock Cranley, former Vinewood stuntman, actor, and now highly qualified candidate for governor. I hate immigrants, the crippled. I can't stand unions, cops, old ladies. The thing is, at least you know I'm a dick. My opponent, Sue Murray, is a know-it-all shrew who actually thinks helping people is the best way to help people. Listen, I've base jumped off skyscrapers. I understand the intricacies of city planning. We've cared about people for far too long. I'm not extending a helping hand. I'm giving you all the finger. Vote for me, Jock Cranley, and help yourselves.
This message paid for by Jock Cranley for governor.
I apologise in advance here, you know, to outline the 2 types of people in the games aren't political camp. We're going to have to go deep into the seedy underbelly of politics, unfortunately. So bear with me for the next few minutes. Ironically, as the game examples come later, it'll be slightly less political in regards of there won't be real world examples like at this point. So it's actually going to get less political as the video goes on. Now, the first type of person is the beleaguered soul. So they're sick of politics because at the end of the day, their life hasn't changed for the better at all. Whether it's Democrat or Republican, nobody really pretends or cares that they exist at the end of the day. And the systemic problems within society that affect them on a daily basis, there doesn't seem to be any drive whatsoever to sort those out to the betterment of those who pay their taxes and vote for you. The two-party system is a problem because it only focuses on those who swing from one side to the other. Everyone else who is loyal to them, similar like you don't really seem to get too much of a benefit if you're a loyal customer to a brand, for example. It's a bit like that, but with politics, you know. You would think they would also listen to those loyal to them, but they don't. It's all about being in power to make the decisions here, not to the betterment of society and those involved with it. We won't even get started on those who aren't even able to have a democratic voice. So we're not in a true democracy, really. They just want to use games as escapism. And with the world as it is, I cannot blame them at all. Through many periods of my life, since, you know, I started becoming aware of politics, I've just wanted nothing to do with it. Because the more you learn about it, the more depressing things become. And that seems to be across political spheres, whether you're a rightoid or a leftist, and all of the little groups and labels in between, you know. Unless you're a tepid centrist. If you're a tepid centrist, you'll be happy with the way things are going, and you'll be like, well, let's carry on status quo. It's alright for me. I mean, given as well, we're in the middle. Well, I don't know if we're in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know how long this will go on for, personally. And as someone who's immunocompromised, following the decisions made by leaders is very depressing, because they have my life in their hands, effectively. And I will constantly see enlightened centrists claim that it's too political to criticise the most powerful man in the UK over his poor decisions regarding the pandemic, you know. Saying stuff like that is legitimately harmful, because you want a leader to be free of all criticism, right? When we go down that road, it does not go well for the rest of society, okay? So yeah, of course you would play games or something to escape. Don't blame them at all. Really don't blame them at all, you know? If I could escape from the world via the medium of games right now, I would. But I can't escape. I know too much. I've seen some shit, boys. So because of that, either they don't want anything to do with politics because they know a bit and they know enough to know that it's kind of a depressing subject, right? So they avoid it, or they've never engaged with it, so they just don't understand when a game makes a political reference or has an outright political theme and world regarding it, you know. They just don't notice it. These people are the innocent in this regard. There a pipeway between the two. You can find yourself in that pipeway. I did. But at the end of this section, I'll give you some more details regarding this. Type 2 are the gamers, and they are the very firm get politics out of my games crowd. They will lap up any sort of video that is yelling about politics being in the games. But the thing is, their idea of politics isn't everything political. They're doing it wrong. They're not actually trying to remove politics from games. They're just trying to remove opinions that they disagree with or representation that they don't like. They are not keen on diversity and representation at all. So for them, trans character, lesbian, any sort of character in the LGBT, moving on from that, any character that isn't white, usually, they don't like it, and they will see that as a political statement, even though making a character that represents them effectively in terms of, straight white male character, that's also a political statement about representation. But because that's the normal to them and that's the status quo, that's apolitical to them. It's like those people I mentioned a couple minutes ago. They support Boris, so Boris doing good is apolitical to them because that's who they voted for. But if you criticise him, you're being political. It's moronic, for want of a better word. But these people also, now, I'm not for the interests of fairness here, I'm not going to say they're all incredibly toxic online, but there's a big group inside that are often incredibly toxic online. Some people will just be against these things and just complain about it. Some people will try and, abuse companies into doing what they say. And it works. It does work, There are countless times that games have had to come out with inherently political themes like Cyberpunk and just say, oh, it's not making any political statements though, Or, as of this weekend, Euro Truck Simulator 2 thought it was a great idea and totally not morally reprehensible to try and make some money off the pandemic by doing a pandemic event inside game for PR. Well, unfortunately, in the Czech Republic, vaccinations are a hotly disputed topic. So that was seen as them supporting vaccinations. And then they did a U-turn saying, we don't want to be political in this. So yeah, the people were that mad about it, that pissy about having a vaccination in a game. You were delivering COVID vaccines or something in the trucks, right? That they did a U-turn and say, well, we're not making a political statement here, right? Yeah, we're not doing that. It's utterly silly. It's so silly that so many people are so scared of saying, oh yeah, there's a tiny bit of politics in this game because they're worried about pissing off people, It's almost like the absurd caricature of the SJWs wasn't the baddie the whole time, and maybe they were. But we'll get onto that in a second. Also, lest we not forget, based on a story event of The Last of Us 2, the person playing Abby in it got sent death threats for what someone wrote her to do. She has no control over what happens in that game. I'm not saying abuse Neil Druckmann at all. You shouldn't do it at all. It's incredibly shitty behaviour, and every time I see something like that, I'm just like, I don't really want to call myself a gamer anymore. When you're doing stuff like that, you need to step back, maybe get other hobbies, because you're too invested and you are doing stuff which are beyond the pale. Nobody should be sent death threats. It's like when Cyberpunk was delayed yet again, they sent death threats to people working on the game, because that's a totally normal thing to do, a normal reaction. Those people have some severe thinking to do, And I think even those people who I'm kind of criticising in the video today, you have a responsibility to point those people out and speak out against those who are being incredibly toxic online, because it makes you look bad as well, because they're in your group and they support your ideas that you're posting. So you're not responsible for what they do, but they take the things and the videos that you say and use it to abuse people. And that's not okay. Now, moving on from there, they're not a complete lost cause, as I've been both these people, the beleaguered soul and the gamer. So what happens here is you're just incredibly depressed and miserable. That's how you become the beleaguered soul. Maybe you have some ignorant opinions and you have a friend, for example, like I did, that was very political, and you would just kind of speak politics with him but not really have a great interest in politics. So he'd send you, oh look at this feminist being destroyed and memed and joked about. So you'd watch those videos, and before you know it, you're then you've moved further into the pipeline, if you will, by actually watching political videos about feminism, going, oh well, we don't need feminism now because, it's against the law to be sexist. Job done. Same goes for racism. And then you fall into the pipeline of those people saying that, yeah, you were right, and here's why. And then it carries on from there. And then you start believing that there's this big scapegoat of triggered SJWs, for want of a better word, that have immense power over the game industry, and that's why there's so much diversity and representation. You know that there are problems inside the gaming industry, but you go at it from the wrong angle. So you're looking at problems that aren't problems. The real problems that you should be looking at is the sheer nature of developers being overworked and underpaid, you know? But yeah, you don't. You're like, oh well, it's the representation that's the real problem. Both groups here won't like monetization the way it is, but those inside the gamers will put it down to the individual companies, not the actual system itself, which the system is all about making as much profit continuously for as long as possible. Maybe you'll start to realize, maybe just following the ideas, maybe these ideas aren't as great as they think they are. Maybe you'll see a video that completely refutes something that someone you had trusted had said in such a fundamental way that maybe you're like, yeah, I can't follow this person anymore. They're an idiot. Maybe you'll watch more of that left-wingers content, that you'll realise, wow, they're doing a really good job of dismantling all the views that you previously had. And maybe you'll go from there and start parroting and really trying to understand those other viewpoints, and then you'll change your viewpoint entirely to the point where people who know you go, wow, you've changed, and not saying it in a complimentary way either. That was my journey, kind of speak. To perfectly clarify, I wasn't overly keen on diversity and representation. It wasn't out of a, it shouldn't be a thing. It was out of a, oh, they're only doing this to get your money, which I wasn't wrong, but at the same time, they were doing that for white people. Throughout the entirety of the PS3, Xbox 360 generation, with the whole straight white male character. And while I didn't feel represented, because I had a very simplistic view on representation, it was like, if they're not skinny, bit of a loner, terrible with women, and have glasses, then it doesn't represent me. I don't feel represented. So it was kind of a thing that if they just put like an LGBT character in a game, why would people feel represented? I never thought to ask someone who felt represented by the game why. I didn't even think to do that. If I'd done that like years ago, I'd have been like, oh, okay. Because I wasn't that, like, I'm stubborn, but if someone says this is why is a thing, I'd listen to them. So yeah, I was like a gamer, if you will, where it was my main thing and the main thing of my personality, but I never went anywhere near some of the disgusting elements like sending abuse or something. You know, my past is something I'm not proud of, but people do make mistakes at the end of the day. They aren't a complete lost cause. It's just very difficult to get one to listen to you. So the whole point about this part is to give 3 examples of games that use political themes and are still good. You know, there are so many more that I could have used, but admittedly, this is somewhat subjective over whether the game is good or not, you know, but I'm just using some examples. But yeah, it's not to say a political game or games that have politics in them are inherently bad. That's what I'm disproving, or attempting to at least. Now we start with BioShock. Need I say any more? You know? Checkmate? I win? But all jokes aside, the idea behind the new Atlantis, if you will, Rapture, Beneath the Sea, was objectivism. That was a philosophical idea from the enlightened centrist and worse's hero, Ayn Rand, who has put that out through, most notably through the books The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So she describes objectivism as the concept of man as a heroic being with his own happiness and as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity and reason as his only absolute. No wonder the enlightened intellectuals that plague Reddit and other social medias probably get off on this kind of stuff. I'm not about to sit here and go, well, I know more about Rand's philosophy than she does, because that would be very disingenuous of me. So how as I understand it, pure self-interest for the betterment of society, rational objectivity above all. So, you know, you can already see people are going to suffer here because an individual's self-interest is not necessarily for the betterment of society, as in, it's individual for a reason. We have different interests, self-interest. We want different things. We are not entirely a collective that all think exactly the same thing. So there isn't really going to be a betterment of society. But they believe like free thinkers available to do whatever they want does benefit society. That's where they're coming from with this. You know, rational objectivity above all. You know, it's like the rational skeptics idea of YouTube when they, you know, were debunking feminism or something 5 years ago and they had their golden time. It just makes me think of that. They're the rationals. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, that philosophy is never going to work in real life values, you know. It's the philosophy you would see most likely at the top of a huge corporation, most likely, you know. The CEO is acting, you know, in his self-interest when, you know, Bobby Kotick of Activision, for example, is, you know, trying to increase profits for him and his shareholders by firing hundreds of people right when they make the most money that they've ever made, you know. Always achieving and trying to go for increased profits year on year, as if that is sustainable. And it's admittedly unsustainable if you're having to fire people to do so. Now, it's from my belief at least that the devs tried to present this idea as neutrally as they possibly could, really. It's Andrew Ryan's hypocrisy that leads to the decay of society. Now, he has a nemesis in Frank Fontaine, who I'm not going to give you the background of this, as I don't want to ruin the story for you, as it was kind of, well, it wasn't ruined for me, but I know the big thing at the end, and it was amazing. So if you don't know BioShock and its story, please, it's only a few pounds on Steam most of the time on sales, please experience it for yourself. It is a game that if I had experienced it and not known the ending being one of the most memorable endings in games ever, right? Oh my god, it would have been the best, one of the best things I'd ever played. It still is, despite knowing the huge twist, so to speak. But Frank Fontaine and Andrew Ryan didn't get on, surprisingly enough. They hated each other. They were big enemies, but unfortunately, Ryan was starting to make steps within his own society to try and stop him. He's going against his own ideals to try and consolidate his own power and to stop his enemy. Understandable to a certain degree, but the people saw that one, Life Down on Rapture wasn't as good as it was advertised to the world. Who'd have thought? Because you're at the mercy of one guy's self-interest ruling down on you, and at the mercy of random people's self-interest on the street. So like, if they want a bit of money because they're addicted to plasmids, they're just going to shoot you and steal your money and inject themselves with more plasmids, you know. It was one of those ideas that's like, in theory, could be a utopia, but in practice, not so great. So they were saying like there was issues within society, but I don't think they outwardly were saying it would never work or anything. It's portrayed as Andrew Ryan going against his ideals that kind of lead this kind of thing. At least that's how I took it. So civil unrest led to, you know, Mr. Fontaine using that civil unrest to, you know, instigate a civil war, if you will. And it's at that civil war where you take control in the first BioShock game. And it's the political themes there of like, what if some rich guy, you know, decided to make a city underwater and be completely independent from all societal laws from elsewhere? You know, it's intriguing. It's the kind of thing you'd expect Elon Musk to do these days. because Jeff Bezos is already too busy cosplaying as Doc Octopus really to notice, to have those delusions of grandeur in that regard, of making a city in his own image, if you will. I cannot stress this enough. If you've not played BioShock through to the end, you absolutely need to. It is great. So, for example 2, we're going to be talking about Wolfenstein, the Machine Games / Bethesda published ones. The ones I've played, admittedly. I haven't played Youngblood, but I have played the other 3 that came out of this partnership. So in those, you have the New Order, the Old Blood, and the New Colossus, which we're all going to talk about in this part. So obviously, if for those unaware, it's an alternate history where the Nazis won, but it's actually a good game, unlike Turning Point Fall of Liberty. But that's a discussion for another time. The New Order was more simple than the New Colossus in regards of you were running a resistance across Europe, eventually into Germany, but the main point of the game was revenge, against an evil scientist called Death's Head, who forced you into an impossible decision at the start. Now, I don't want to go into much more detail because I've tried to give these examples with the least amount of in-game spoilers as possible, but obviously giving you bits of lore going into it so you have an understanding. You should all try to play these games on your own time because, in my opinion at least, they're all very good examples of good games that have political themes in them, Now, the Old Blood is less political than the New Order, as it's set before you're running the resistance. So it's set before the very beginning of New Order as well. It runs straight into that first game. That's why I'd recommend it, because the story links together. And there's some supernatural weird shit that I'm going to go on, which, find out for yourself, it's very fun. I like it. It's weird and kooky. I like it very much so. And the gameplay is fantastic. I would say this, Machine Games are the best people on the market for shooting mechanics. Their shooting mechanics are better than any other game that I've played, shooter-wise. Admittedly, I don't play Call of Duty anymore, so let's not get into that argument. They really do stand up. Machine Games, whenever they make a shooter, you know it's going to be good. And in Old Blood, they had expanded on the first game. They added perks, which gave you benefits by doing in-game things. It made your character a little bit better. And it also had a bit more variety. Where New Order, you were just kind of gunning through waves of Nazis and not being able to really sneak at all. You had different options in Old Blood. You could gun through everyone if you wanted, or you could be more stealthy about it, which, adds a little bit more fun there, the more variety over the choices that you can make. But on to the New Colossus. This is where they expanded the themes politically, and some people have a problem with that, of course. They get politics out of our games. People were not really happy before this game came out. We'll get onto that a bit later, because it's an amusing example, if I do say so myself. The New Colossus was set in 1960s America under occupation, which I think is a unique and interesting idea, because it's rarely in games that the USA are portrayed as a loser in any battle, because the gaming market in America is fucking massive. So people don't really go there because, they want to be able to have that market and they don't want to piss anyone off. They want people to pay. It's why people they won't do any sort of anti-Chinese messaging in a game whatsoever, because they want that 10-cent money and to be able to sell the game in China. Because if they have any political themes against China in their game, they will block it. There's a recent example of a game doing this and getting removed from GOG and many other games launchers like Steam for that very reason. So also here they explore societal issues at the time like racism, which, you know, allows you to know how the Nazis were able to take over a country as big as America. Obviously they had the advantage in terms of, within the law, they had advantage to these ancient Jewish technology which allowed them to build these super weapons that no fighting force, no matter how strong they were, could really withstand them for very long. But going back in there, America in the 60s was very racist, wasn't it? You know, minorities had to do long protests and riots just to try and get the government to listen to them. Because for the government, it was all very good for the status quo. The majority of the people in America were white, so they didn't want anything to change at all. They would have had their own bigoted beliefs about those who were protesting, similar to those All Lives Matter people who condemn Black Lives Matter at any turn now. There's some parallels there. But without those riots and without those protests, President Kennedy would have never done the Civil Rights Act. And you think America's bad now. Imagine what it's like in that alternate history. So by going in and using real life past politics there in this story, it was bound to ruffle some feathers, no doubt. It's also referenced in a few missions and flashbacks with someone integral to BJ's like story, if you will. I won't give you the details. You should experience it for yourself. Like all the other games in this list, it's quite, it's quite something, you know. I don't think my words can really do the examples justice, really. Now, here's the thing. The whole game is about fighting fascism with extreme prejudice, you know. Punch Nazis, shoot Nazis, all that shit, right? And anytime you're fighting an enemy that is authoritarian, then it's a political game, isn't it? You know, there's so many games where you're building your own revolution and taking it over. Technically speaking, Just Cause is kind of political in that regard, because usually you're toppling militaristic dictator or something on behalf of the American intelligence services, or in the case of Just Cause 3, going back to your going back home and liberating it, you know. So there are so many games that have political themes that people just don't think about, you know. This is the interesting and juicy bit. So obviously when your game is about killing Nazis, you're going to advertise it in such. Now, they used the punching Nazis controversy somewhat to advertise their game, as you would, you know. It was kind of like an open goal for them to do so, because it's referenced after the time Richard Spencer, the face of white supremacy, was punched on the street during an interview, you know. And obviously there are people out there who think that any violence whatsoever is bad, so they have interesting bedfellows in this regard, you know. They're willing to stick up for some of the worst people in society out of their moral rights. But it is weird. It is weird watching them do that, admittedly. The gamers were pissed off because, oh, it's left-wing politics saying punch Nazis. You're like, and they're going off the regards of everyone is being called a Nazi these days, because that's what they believe. When, if you ever actually look into what Richard Spencer is, you would realise that's kind of an accurate term for him. Imagine being triggered that somebody said something mean about Nazis. Bloody hell. That is like inconceivable to think that people were moaning about that. It's the same people that equate Antifa with right-wing violence and terrorism, you know, and say they're just as both bad as each other, which is just wrong. If you want to find out why it's wrong, yeah, click that video, watch it through to the end, that's on the screen right now. But yeah, all in all, Wolfenstein is basically an Antifa training simulator. Punch Nazis, get rid of them by any means necessary. So, my spurs have been jangling all day waiting to talk about the best Fallout New Vegas. A game that's set in a post-apocalyptic world where China and America have nuked the shit out of each other and there's just not much left. Perhaps you were one of the lucky ones that were able to escape and go into a vault to escape the radiation. Unfortunately, my sweet summer child, if you were one of those people that went into a Vault-Tec vault, you would have been hideously experimented on in any sort of social experiment that the evil bastards at that private company came up with. They're truly probably the biggest antagonist in the entire game series whatsoever. Now, nuclear weapons are a hotly debated political topic, you know. The anti-war and pro-disarmament camp, for example, think that we should get rid of all of them. It's an ongoing current theme in Metal Gear Solid, if you've ever played those games. In fact, in Metal Gear Solid 5, there was a secret meta in-game of trying to disarm all the players who had a mother base who had a nuke, and if you did that, you got a secret cutscene. They've only been able to do that, I think, on the PlayStation 3, because you got a trophy if you built one, but you could immediately dismantle it again. If you did make one on Metal Gear Solid 5, your heroism points you would immediately become evil if you made one of those. Now, the interesting thing is you're either pro-disarmament or you're one of those that believe in deterrence, you know. And the kind of issues with deterrence I have is that it kind of pushes countries to continue expanding on their nuclear arsenal so that they can be seen as the most powerful country at the negotiation table, you know? Like a measurement to see how big a proverbial country's willy is, or to bring those who don't have good relations with countries that have nuclear weapons to fast track building their own so that they can be safe from invasion, were things to get so bad in relations between those two countries. But yet here we are. But the interesting thing is that the factions are all political in New Vegas, and they will lead to intense discussions. I've had many intense discussions while streaming that game over who is best for New Vegas, to be fair. I'm not so certain myself. I tend to kind of side for the NCR, really. But it's between that or independence for me, personally. I couldn't argue what is the morally best choice, because they all have their own points. Even the cartoonishly evil faction, there are some reasons where you could choose them to benefit society at large. For example, 261-year-old Mr. House, who is the status quo, and he is the main reason why New Vegas is thriving, because he was its protector from most of the nukes. He wasn't, unfortunately, able to save the surrounding areas. Many people think he didn't bother, but he did try. He was just unable to do so. He's also been working on an incredibly old operating system that left him in a coma for like 65 years. I found that out in the researching of this very video, in fact. But he's not powerful enough to control the outer area, so he portrays it as if he doesn't care as well. But similar to like Andrew Ryan with designs for the city of Rapture, he has those grand plans for the city of New Vegas to be that bright, shining star in the desert wasteland. So obviously, at the start of the game, you get robbed for the platinum chip. He's been looking for that for 204 years, and he has spent millions and millions of caps on prospects and salvages to try and find it, because he lost it right before the nukes went off. Poor bastard. He wants to rule through autocracy, which is very similar to Andrew Ryan in Rapture. In fact, so similar, I'm fairly certain, you know, that's where they got their reference from, or, you know, inspiration. They've made a little reference to it. If you have the Gunrunner's Arsenal DLC, there's a challenge that you can do with Mr. House, which is a obvious reference to the end of BioShock, which I'm not going to tell you because that would be telling you a crucial part of the BioShock story. But Mr. House himself wants a system of government controlled by him with absolute power, because he believes he knows exactly what is best for business in regards to New Vegas, and he doesn't care what other people think of that. He doesn't even care what you think of that. But that's very telling if you argue and have like philosophical arguments with Mr. House over what the plan is, you know. He wants to shape New Vegas into the exact way that he sees it, and he'll stop at nothing to do that. The second option, a slightly better option, is Yes Man. Now, this is just picking up and carrying on from Benny's plan, actually, to get out of from under Mr. House and have a more independent New Vegas, if you will. So, by the fact it's more independent, you have the option to investigate other factions during, like, one of the quests for the independent way is just giving you the locations of where to meet the factions on the map, and then go and, you know, either be diplomatic or do their side quests, and then see if you can get them to help you in the fight of Hoover Dam. But what you're effectively doing is just installing yourself as leader here with largely ultimate power. But the difference is you've helped, or other factions have helped you along the way, and by doing so they will be allowed greater power sharing than the fact that they would have had to stay where they are and existed on their own, because Mr. House just doesn't care really about what happens in Freeside or anywhere further out there. That's just not his remit. He doesn't care, you know. He only cares about getting the power from Hoover Dam to power the Strip, and even then he has a backup just in case Hoover Dam gets battered in the battle. So admittedly, it's still one person controlling things, but they're more amenable than Mr. House, or at least that's the way I feel like it's portrayed in game. Now, NCR are one of the two huge factions that are very expansionist, so they have absolutely the most influence in the area. They have a lot more territory than Mr. House does. They're even allowed to operate inside the Strip as long as they don't carry any weapons, and they find themselves funding Mr. House indirectly by their soldiers just going on leave and just spending all their caps in the casinos. Now, they live off the old world values like freedom and democracy, so I can see why people choose NCR. I often do, but they also have the same problems that America have and have had in terms of foreign policy for a long time. They are incredibly expansionist and continue to grow at a frightening rate. In older Fallout games, you would have seen them as like this tiny, small faction in Shady Sands, and they have just exponentially conquered other people's lands through war, or just expanded out there just to see what was out there. And obviously one of their scouts saw Hoover Dam, so they started mobilizing to move their troops here in another war that the people back home don't even like, that you can gather. For the citizens of New Vegas, they're not really keen on NCR coming over here and forcing them to change currency and making them pay taxes on stuff. They don't like it. And also, due to their expansion, if you go to Camp McCarran and talk to the scientist Thomas Hildern, he'll tell you that in the future the NCR will be too big and not have enough farms growing food, that there will be a famine. So he sends you off to look for something that can grow food quick that he heard that was in Vault 22, which is an interesting attention to detail there, that this game has more than other games that are RPGs. Now, they are somewhat poorly managed and riddled with corruption. So even Caesar himself acknowledges that that is one of the reasons he thinks NCR is doomed to fail, and that's what he can use against them. So they believe in free market economy, but similar to the free market, power just doesn't tend to trickle down. It just tends to stay at the top with those who have money to lobby those in power. So in this case, it's the Brahmin barons. So the Brahmin, they obviously use for meat, and meat is extremely important for the NCR because they keep expanding, so they need food more than ever, so they keep expanding, and the Brahmin barons get access to more land, which allows them to get more richer, and when they get more richer, it allows them to spend more money lobbying to get the NCR to do what they want them to do, kind of thing. And it just continues from there in a cycle until effectively Mr. House has somewhat cucked them into protecting the dam for him from the Legion for the past few years, and that they're just spending loads of their money and resources protecting Mr. House in a power sharing thing. Now, the last one, the "Are we the baddies?" one. Caesar's Legion. They're basically LARPing Romans. Caesar read books about ancient Rome and decided, yeah, let's do that again. But he made a religion about himself, so it is integral that he survives at all costs. But if he dies, for example, it will crumple from within, because the person who takes over, Legate Lanius, is not built to rule. He is built for war. He only cares about upcoming battles. He's an intelligent man, as you'll realise if you get towards the end of the game. You can talk him out of the ending battle if your skills are high enough in various skills. But he is a formidable warrior, just like the rest of the Legion. I do believe they defeated 86 tribes and then erased their tribal identity and brought them into the Legion. And he will just literally chat to you about philosophy and Hegelian dialectics, which for a long time I didn't even know what they were, and still I'm somewhat confused about it. He will literally talk politics and philosophy with you right at the start of the Legion quest line. They are slavers and have terrible, terrible thoughts about women. So for that reason, they're considered the evil option, undoubtedly. So much so that if you are a female character in New Vegas, women aren't allowed to fight. So if you go into their arena and fight like you can as a male character, they just won't let you. They'll have little bits of dialogue seeming so surprised when you turn up at the fort, because they just don't see women having any agency and being any sort of equality as men whatsoever, because they're indoctrinated into that from a very young age. You see, they're training kids for war at a very early age. Now, hear me out. The reason why someone might choose the Legion, other than to get the trophies and maybe they hate women or something, is raiders completely disappear in areas under Legion control, because they literally murder all degenerates as they see degenerates, right? Anyone who is antithetical to the Legion way of life, and they make no exceptions. So raiders have no power whatsoever because they know they'll be hunted down to the very last man. So their brutality allows people to live in safety as long as you follow by their rules and just do what they tell you. Like, traders don't need guards in Legion territory. They literally walk around by themselves, which is unheard of in New Vegas and even the Capital Wasteland. They also don't have to pay NCR taxes and use NCR currency. Admittedly though, there is a Legion currency as well, You don't hear too much about it in New Vegas because it's very rare that places let you use it anyway. It's mostly on caps, and then the NCR paper money is essentially worth very little. And I'll kill loads of Legion guards and just have this stockpile of Legion cash that I've got nowhere other than casinos where I can just turn it in for chips and then cash out those chips again. That's what you need to do if you get loads of Legion money killing people, by the way. You're welcome. So yeah, it's very political. You could play this apolitically. You know, it's just fun for me. It's fun for me just trying to hear the justifications of a quasi-god-like leader of slavers that are terrible try to justify himself about it. And the whole game is building up to the Hoover Dam battle. And like, there's so many little side quests that have an influence on that final battle that it's interesting. You know, it's the build-up, you know. Playing the Hoover Dam battle is very, very fun. Those are my 3 examples. Right, so that's kind of a conclusion there. Those are my 3 examples of political games. Obviously, I could have gone into much more detail and could have provided more, but you know, people have short attention spans, don't they? So I didn't want to make it too long, but I still wanted to make sure that what I needed to say was said, so there was like a balancing act going on in this. For example, like if you type political into Steam, there's an entire subgenre of Steam games. If you've ever played anything like Civilization, that's an inherently political game in itself, because you can just run the experiment to see what happens when you have like ultra attacking force but under communism, if you will. It's weird, it's interesting. Stuff like Tropico, where you're basically a dictator in a tropical country, really. So yeah, games being political isn't an inherently bad thing, you know. There is interesting narrative points to come from this. I just wish we can get to a point one day where developers don't have to shy away from these topics, because I can enjoy playing a Legion character without wanting a return to slavery, right? And Cyberpunk, for example, as a genre is inherently political, but they still feel the need to distance it from politics because they don't want to annoy fragile gamers who will just, like, you know, get mad about it. It's like the same thing when I mentioned earlier with the anti-vaxxers getting mad at Euro Truck Simulator. Less of that, please. Like, if we want games to be taken more seriously, we need to allow developers to explore the narrative threads that they want to, in my opinion. You know? Everyone has a right to be critical of something that you didn't like that they did their particular story arc or whatever. You're entitled to your opinion, but too often those opinions are weaponized against developers, and then we get subpar products because of that. So that was the video. I hope you liked it. I was trying to engage those who wouldn't necessarily think about this kind of thing, you know. It's funny because one of my friends on Twitter literally inspired me just by their Twitter name. I was like, oh yeah, I could do a video about that. So here it is. It's come from inspiration from a Twitter name. You know, I've managed to create all this just from such a tiny premise, you know. Watching videos on YouTube as well about the themes and doing deeper analysis into New Vegas and stuff like that made me think about this kind of thing. Because I myself, back at a time in 2010, did not, rather sheltered upbringing. I knew nothing about politics. Didn't know anything what about the game was doing other than NCR's good, Legion's bad. That's how I was enjoying the game. Each subsequent playthrough I've made of New Vegas, for example, I've learned more and more about it, which is nice because it allows more enjoyment, you know. And I think it's okay to have games that aren't political, as well as those that are, you know. You don't have to be either or, you know. People's opinions are entirely subjective, you know. This entire video is subjective at the end of the day. I'm just making the case that politics isn't inherently bad in video games. And games are political, a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So yeah, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I really want to thank you if you've got to the end of this video. I very much appreciate it. And, I mean, you know what to do. Subscribe, like, all that goodness. Maybe, like, give some examples of games that you like that are also political. Or maybe even discuss, like, why you don't want things to be political or something. Maybe just let's have a discussion, you know. So yeah, hopefully you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one.